Welcome to anyone who is just joining us for this 14th Annual Agroforestry Symposium. We are entering session 2, which is a series of lightning talks focused on perennial partnerships in the long efforts involved in improvement and integration, as we learned from Dr. Jordan and Dr. Miller this morning. I will briefly introduce our presenters in pairs according to their crop of choice, and they'll each share a 10-minute talk, and then we'll follow each pair with a short block of time dedicated to your questions. And if we have time at the end, we can ask questions for everyone. And hopefully, if we have time, can maybe even hear from some of you who are also growing these perennial crops or involved in some other perennial crop improvement partnership. All right. We are going to start this session with our perennial grains representatives. We heard a little bit about Kernza this morning. Tessa Peters from the Land Institute and Ben Penner, a grower of Kernza. I had the pleasure of meeting both of them at the Land Institute's Prairie Festival. Highly recommend checking that out if you are anywhere near Kansas. Tessa Peters is the Land Institute's Director of Crop Stewardship. She has a PhD in plant breeding and plant genetics, and she now focuses on adoption, innovation, scaling, and building legitimacy for novel perennial grain crops like Kernza. And Ben Penner is an organic grain grower, including Kernza in Minnesota, who is leading the development of a Kernza cooperative. He says of his farm, Penner Farms exist to inspire human flourishing through agriculture. I love that. So for these two, let's start now. Tessa, if you are ready to begin the session, we're ready for you. We'll go to Tessa and then Ben for this first pairing.
I think I'm ready.
Great. Let's see.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, let me swap the pin over to you. And yeah, we're seeing your screen and you sound good.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. I'm really excited to talk and especially to present with Ben because I think he'll have a lot of good things to say about actually growing Kernza and can probably answer some of the questions. But I'm also really glad that Nick went first because he did a lot of the theory stuff. So I'm excited to just talk about what we do. So at the Land Institute, we're really focused on developing a diverse perennial agriculture that promotes community life that's prosperous and enduring. So that's what we're focused on. One of the things that we're working on to do that is developing perennial grains and perennial grain cropping systems. The grain that I'm going to talk about today is Kernza. Kernza is the seed or grain of Thinopyrum intermedium, intermediate wheatgrass. The name comes from a portmanteau of kernel, which is the seed of the cereal grass, and Kanza, which is a tall grass prairie in the northeast of Kansas. It's the research station where in the mythology of the Land Institute, Wes Jackson, who was the founder, had this epiphany that we should try and develop agricultural systems that mimicked natural systems, which are primarily dominated by perennials and also characterized by diversity. It's also an alternative name of the Kaw Nation and the Kaw people, so I want to acknowledge that. Kernza has been being domesticated for about 20 years, but if you look at major crop domestication, it primarily began things like wheat 10,000 years ago. And then 60 years ago, we had the Green Revolution. And so we saw, yield spikes based on the input of, chemicals that could increase yields and standardize environments. And then 20 years ago, here on the very end, we see Kernza domestication start. So I like to start with this because I want people to understand that there are challenges. Of course, there are challenges in developing new crops. And we're trying to make up this gap, right? This gap of, 10,000, almost 10,000 years, 9,980 years in our domestication process. One of those challenges is yield. So we're currently at about 35% of wheat yield. We're trying to bring that up. The additional, we're also trying to improve the amount of naked seed, and we're starting to really see that increase. We're getting up to like 76% of the seed that of new cycles of selection are naked, and we're also seeing an increase in seed mass. So this is really an important thing for us to understand, because we are seeing yields increase, and that's something that you know has often been debated. Like, can perennials even begin to reach the yields of annuals? And we didn't know. At this point, we think we haven't got any evidence that yields are not increasing as we make selections. So we believe that they will continue to increase. Here you can see this is the cycle 0, or the wild type Kernza, on the left, and cycle 5, which has been widely grown in production systems by growers over the last couple of years. We've actually now retired that variety and are moving fully on to new varieties in all locations. So even better yield differences than we're seeing in this glass jar. I also like to think about the timeline of commercialization. So we have this innovation phase, and now we've sort of moved into this pilot phase. This is really where like the work of crop stewardship begins. This is the work where things start happening off the research station. So we're really in this proof of concept or pilot phase where we're looking at, you know, small acres. The acreages on farm are relatively small number of acres, but the people that we're working with are really innovative and strategic and coordinated. These are the niche actors that Nick was talking about. People like Ben, who you'll meet in a minute. And we're here. So we're sort of like maybe getting close to the middle of the proof of concept or pilot phase. We're not at full commercialization. And I think it will take increasing yield, which is going to be both through improved plant breeding, but also through improved agronomic and management practices that we're trying to document. The supply chain for Kernza right now looks like this. So the grain is harvested and cleaned and dehulled and cleaned again, and then sold as either whole grain or flour. Sometimes it's milled. And then it is used and sold again into products like noodles, breads, cereals, beers, and all over the US. So these are examples of those, but we're seeing these kinds of products pop up from different companies kind of all over. We're also, because we own the trademark, this has given us the ability to really look at new ways of governance. And this is one of the things that Nick mentioned in his presentation. We're working on a new type of business association where we share ownership of the trademark with the people who are taking the risk. So with the actual licensees, these folks will own this LLC, and will own the perpetual purpose trust, will own the trademark. And these things will all work together to make sure that licensees, so these would be growers, food companies, supply chain actors, all have a say in how Kernza moves into the marketplace. And this work, I want to mention, is benefited through government funding. So we are also seeing that these multiple types of capital from the regime and landscape scale are starting to notice Kernza, and we are getting some funding from those entities. Nick talked about the Valley of Death, and I want to talk a little bit about how that pertains to intermediaries. I am an intermediary in this system that we're trying to move forward. So right now, I would say we're trying to move from this government funded and academic lab funded and philanthropic funded place to private sector and investors, and we're in this transfer and adoption area. And so Ben is one of the leading edge early adopters. We're trying to get Kernza to look like business as usual for everyone, from small companies to big companies. And so this is where I live. And that's what I've got. So I think I stayed on time.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Tessa. That was wonderful, and everyone so far is amazing. Glad to be here. My name is Ben Penner, and as already mentioned, I am a grower, a farmer, a Kernza farmer, and I'm located in St. Peter, Minnesota. So to orient yourselves as to where exactly that is in the Minnesota River Valley. About 75 miles southwest, about south of the Twin Cities Airport, Minneapolis and St. Paul. And it is a heavily corn growing region, soybeans, hogs, some dairy, and has undergone significant change over recent and long periods of time. So as a small grain grower, which I am, a little bit of an outlier. There is some small grain here, but it's not the dominant crop on the landscape. So in part, that's why, and I should add a quick biographical rationale for that. I grew up about 30 miles from the Land Institute, so I was quite well aware of what was going on there, even as a kid. And that led me to Minnesota and to get involved in this Kernza work. I wear several hats, like almost every farmer that I know. And so one of those hats, in addition to my small farm, is that I am one of the early adopters of Kernza, and I am the vice president of the Perennial Promise Growers Cooperative. So there in that photo, you see me and our vice president and a number of other folks in the Kernza field a couple of years ago, where we were discussing, as we were at the very early stages of this forming this cooperative. So I'm going to kind of switch back and forth seamlessly a little bit between my own personal experience with Kernza, as well as those who I represent as Kernza growers. And our mission statement is to essentially help growers market and sell Kernza in the marketplace. And that can mean any number of things, which includes planting, growing, harvesting, all kinds of assistance for this new crop where there really isn't, I mean, there's great resources from the university, but there isn't a roadmap out at scale on the landscape. So we do a lot of peer-to-peer kind of networking and mentoring on that. In the future, we're hoping to work with winter camelina and other Forever Green Initiative crops that come out from the University of Minnesota. I also grow winter rye, which is also a focus crop. I think one piece that we strive to do, but are at very nascent stage, is to find out how these ecosystem services that we're all hearing about can actually be brought to bear on the farm field, and how that can add value to the landscape as well as to farms and communities. So why Kernza? Why are we all growing Kernza? And I guess a pretty simple way to say it is we think it's the right thing to do. Every grower that I work with, speaking for myself, we realize what situation that we're in globally, and feel like this response is honestly about the most direct thing that any of us can do to really to go towards a different future. And I think we're all innovators, so it really does highly select for people who have that kind of innovative gene in their business DNA. We've worked with the Land Institute, we've worked with the University of Minnesota and others, and we are in very close contact with those folks. So why isn't Kernza everywhere? And as has been touched on in a few other presentations, the price is still finding its equilibrium. And at least in my area and most areas, what we're competing with really is the revenue of a corn and bean rotation. And so that is just a fact of our landscape. Yield, we're still understanding what the yield dynamics will be out in the field, out in my fields. And there's a growing but small amount of infrastructure that actually will support the work that we're trying to do. So a lot of us actually have on farm, we work on with our own equipment on farm and find ways to get it into the marketplace. There's some processing and handling, but not a lot. It's kind of what I call, the problem of there's plenty of capacity out there, but really motivating all actors to move in that direction takes a significant social shift as well as economics that's been talked about. And when we're talking yield, it is a significant difference. We're talking in pounds versus bushels. In this area, somewhere between 250 and 300 bushels of corn. So there's that hurdle as well. Most of us are involved in one way or another with university work. The USDA Kernza CAP, which was awarded to the University of Minnesota a couple of years ago. And are working closely with researchers, both on an economic front as well as an economic front, to make sure that whoever comes after us, that people who will be the next adopters, actually have a roadmap towards success. And Tess, forgive me if some of this data hopefully is still up to date, but there's approximately 5,000 acres grown, and the average yield is around 400 acres. That really, 400 pounds per acre. That kind of tracks with our own cooperative data, which we have about 1,100 active acres out of around 1,700 that were planted all time. We have 30 members that are scattered in Minnesota and Wisconsin, South Dakota, some Iowa, but the heaviest part of that is in Minnesota. And we've learned quite a bit about how to really get this crop out on the landscape collaboratively. As you know, Kernza is a popular in the media landscape. And so what we're trying to do is really bring the kind of sinews and tendons to bear on making that a reality for growers. Real quickly, we have a very seasoned team. So I mentioned I'm the vice president. Carmen Fernholz, who is really one of the early, the very early adopter of Kernza here in Minnesota, is our president. And we have a dedicated team of board members, both in Wisconsin as well as in Minnesota. Just as an example, we solve problems. Jay Peterson is working on a mobile cleaning unit that we just purchased over the last couple of weeks in order to do on-farm and on-site cleaning that will hopefully bridge that gap between what the current infrastructure abilities and needs are with our supply chain partners and what we can do on the farm. We've hired a marketer, and Alex Heilman and Elizabeth Candelario from Mad Ag out in Colorado have been working with companies to really work it into their supply chains, as well as some advisors that we have. So we really have kind of a great team that I'm excited to be a partner with. And some of the benefits of cooperative membership are that we're really trying to keep the supply and the demand sort of in a balance, so that there's not an oversupply situation and that there's not an undersupply situation, so that that buyers can really have confidence that we're able to bring their supply to bear when they need it, rather than and try to keep the price at a level that can compete on the landscape. I'm going to go through a few of these quickly, but starting any new organization takes a tremendous amount of work. We did most of it so far over Zoom, partially due to the pandemic, which forced us to not be in person. And this is a highly social process, building a new organization. But right now we spent frankly thousands of hours on Zoom, working with one another and getting an organization started. We just completed this year a capital campaign, and that has allowed us to make some required purchases. And we've we've started making sales into the marketplace, and we have a brand new website as of a few weeks ago. So every time I update this presentation, there's something new that comes along that that is coming online. Yeah, I think, when it comes to what we're looking towards for the future is to bring all of these different pieces into alignment for growers in a professionalized manner. And fortunately, we have a good roadmap to follow with a lot of different commodities, and yet Kernza is quite a bit different. So it's similar and yet different. So that's what we're hoping for the future. How can I get involved? If you're a grower, you can talk to either me or to our president, Carmen Fernholz, and email us at info@perennialpromise.com. Or and if you're a buyer, then also get in touch with us, and we'd love to talk with you about how you can work with us to supply your grain, Kernza grain needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben and Tessa, both for those great presentations. I think this is such a perfect example of what Nick was describing in the last session about this process of scaling. What does it look like? And the time that it takes, and the effort and the hours, it's like there are so many components to this. There are some wonderful questions coming in. We'll take just a couple of them in this Q&A time before we switch to the next set of presenters. And I realize we've been spending a lot of time on Kernza this morning, and we're here for the Agroforestry Symposium. I think Allison Miller did a great job of describing how that's connected. But I did want to just bring up a couple of these while we have a minute. One that I know Tessa responded to, but I think is important to bring up for the whole group. What do we know about where Kernza does best? Where Kernza yields the highest? Related, is there any ongoing work breeding locally adapted Kernza varieties?
I would say we kind of know where Kernza doesn't do well. It does need temperatures of lower than 50 degrees to trigger flowering. So it needs that winter dormancy or vernalization. So we know that it's probably not well adapted to like the Southeast or somewhere like that for grain production. And we know that it doesn't like to have wet feet. So you don't want to plant it in a field that gets flooded. So we know things like that. I would say in general, it seems to do pretty well anywhere that cool season grasses do well. I don't know, Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, it really can grow in a wide range of places. I mean, we grow it quite well here in southern Minnesota, and we have very deep topsoils here. And I'm very well aware how it grows in Kansas, where it's a different topsoil altogether. I would agree with everything that Tessa said, but I think locally adapted varieties will come online.
Yes.
And that will be required to get the maximum yield out of it that we can, because Kansas is a very different, and it's in a changing climate. Climate in Minnesota may not be the same as it was, or will be. So I think we need to look at that as well.
Yeah, and there are breeding programs in like about 6 places, I think, right now. And so I'm hopeful that we'll see new varieties come on from those different environments where breeders are making selections, and that hopefully those will do better in those local areas.
I think it's critical. It's absolutely critical to have specifically local. So I'm thrilled that the University of Minnesota in my location is dedicated to that. And they're, what they've got coming online right now, it just coming up is really exciting. Right now, what I've got planned is from, some years ago, but what's coming up is pretty cool.
Great, thank you. Okay, we'll do one more question before we shift gears. And I think that question actually will carry over really well to what we hear from Greg Miller and Ron Revord about with the Chestnut Improvement Network. so many of these questions are relevant to other perennial crops as well. So I'm going to try to roll a few questions into one here. Thinking about integration and the ways that the growers, particularly in your cooperative, Ben, are integrating Kernza, presumably not as their only crop. At what point is it financially viable? Are they potentially including Kernza in forage or prairie strips or other ways of integrating into their existing farming practices?
Absolutely. It can absolutely work well in a rotation. And we've done some work here, right, specifically in my area as to siting those acres in the places where it'll be best. I think one thing is to bring more animals, into the mix, because Kernza is dual use crop. That's kind of a smaller, but certainly potentially area of growth.
Are there people who are integrating Kernza as a forage crop as well?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. And do you have thoughts on, there's this specific question about what is the sort of minimum acreage that makes it financially viable?
Yeah, we've sort of aimed at 20 to 30 acres as the smallest. I mean, you can plant 5 acres, but to really get it into the marketplace with different lots, we need a bit more than that. Honestly, that might even change very quickly as the market grows and scales, but that's where we are right now. Yeah.
Great. All right, we are going to transition now to our next set of presenters. Thank you again, Ben and Tessa. Stick around. If we have time at the end of the session for more Q&A for everyone, we may come back around to you all. But for now, I am going to get Greg Miller and Ron Revord queued up here. And let me give you both a really brief introduction here. Greg Miller has a background in tree crop genetics and breeding and has been applying his skills to his chestnut orchards for decades at the Route 9 Cooperative in Eastern Ohio. So it is very fitting that he is one of the lead growers in the newly established Chestnut Improvement Network led by Ron Revord here at the Center for Agroforestry. Dr. Revord is an assistant research professor here at MU who is focused on applied breeding programs, not only for Chinese chestnut, but also for black walnut and Northern Origin pecan. And he's also part of the Hybrid Hazelnut Consortium that we'll hear more about in the final session today. So at this point, I'm honored to pass it over to Ron Revord to start us off for this block.
Thanks, Anna. I'm just going to jump right into it with just 10 minutes here. So I'm Ron Revord. I'm the tree nut breeder at the Center for Agroforestry. My goal here today is to give you a brief overview of the chestnut improvement activities going on at the center here. So some brief context, a cultivar collection was established in 1996 at the center with over 60 cultivars maintained today. The majority of these originated from growers and enthusiast importations and evaluations over the 20th century, including many from Greg, where OP seed was from grower selections was frequently circulated. In 1999, a subset of 12 promising cultivars was established in a replicated trial at MU, leading to the first recommendations for the Missouri River Hills, which is an ideal environment for growing chestnut. Because of delayed graft failure, incompatible interactions are seen to the right here. And interest in cultivation across a wide geographic range, growers outside of the Missouri River Hills opt to plant seedling orchards, which are often planted around a double density so that poor performing seedlings can be culled. To support the success of seedling orchards, UMCA has distributed OP seed from the cultivar collection to growers and nursery partners like Greg since 2008. Today, I want to overview activities 4 through 6 listed here to characterize on-farm selections, establish a new replicated selection trial at the University of Missouri, and organize for next generation on-farm breeding through the Chestnut Improvement Network. To highlight some breeding goals in a quick snapshot, there's a focus on stable production by environment, which includes but is not limited to late leafing and frost avoidance, as well as appropriate harvest and leaf senescence times to avoid late fall cold damage. Of course, high kernel quality is important, like size, color, texture, and flavor, and a low rate of defective characters like split shells or off flavors. There's a common carrot-like flavor in some cultivars. So these are also important performance characters. A high crop load through increased burrs per shoot or male sterility, and then resistance to a variety of diseases and pests. And I know Greg could probably relate with this statement that could sometimes seem like a moving target. Okay, so on to characterizing on-farm selections. So over 1,000 growers have received UMCA repository seed. This map gives you some insight into the extent of seed distribution over time. The depicted farms, blue and red dots, receive seed either directly from the UMCA or a local nursery partner, but this map doesn't even include many of the growers that Greg has distributed seed to, for example. The seedling base represents an invaluable resource to select improved offspring in diverse environments. So we seek to build our improvement efforts from these materials. Participants in on-farm evaluations that we've conducted in my lab since 2020 are seen by the red dots. Evaluations have grown to over 30 growers and around 600 selections across 11 states and are ongoing. Evaluation goals include phenotyping on-farm selections for traits of interest, discerning on-farm selections, ancestry and parentage using a DNA marker set developed by collaborators at Notre Dame, utilizing data from these first two objectives to construct core collections for conservation and breeding. And then lastly, capitalize on momentum from these evaluations to organize a participant network as a new breeding initiative to begin next-gen improvement. So a little bit on the genotyping, many cultivars of Castanea mollissima, the Chinese chestnut, many cultivars are Castanea mollissima or Chinese chestnut complex hybrids with various other Castanea species. Interspecific ancestry is common due to the dynamic history of sharing OP selections over the 20th century. The Romero Severson lab used a training panel, which is the structure output you see here, to develop a set of 45 EST-SSR markers capable of discerning complex ancestry amongst Castanea hybrids. We don't have time to discuss the data here, but the UMCA repository has been genotyped to confirm or correct ancestry, and data from on-farm selections, so the 600 selections, is now being analyzed to do the same, as well as confirm parentage. And we expect these data to help us draw insights on parental combining ability and possible beneficial interspecific ancestry. So on to phenotyping, we won't take a deep dive, but this slide gives you a good picture of the phenotyping workflow. There are 35 characters in total. 7 are qualitative agronomic characters that we take in the field, including a visual assessment of crop load, number of burrs per shoot, and canopy architecture. You could see male sterile and male fertile individual at the top of the slide. Nut and kernel quality includes 16 traits, some of which you see here, and these were typically taken on 2 replications of 15 nuts. Spherical nuts are preferred, and an important size threshold is the 11 to 12 gram range. Some markets prefer larger nuts. In tile F, you could see a partial pellisole detachment with a portion adhered to a kernel invagination, which would be a defect, although that's a pretty good pellisole removal. In tile G, you could see chestnut anthracnose incidents, formerly called blossom end rot. Greg could probably talk at greater depth on that. And so based on 2-year data, 40 preliminary selections have been made from the 600 selections under evaluation. So this is around 6%. These selections represent 10 sites. These sites are shown in red on the slide. 24 sites in green are still have selections under evaluation. Emphasizing nut size, crop load, and defect rate adequately narrowed the selection pool to a manageable preliminary set for propagation. But of course, pest incidents and other characters were considered too. These selections represent the beginnings of a breeder's choice set from this work, but require more evaluation, including replication with all selections in the same environment. So last fall, a completely randomized replicated trial was established at the Horticulture and Agroforestry Research Center. 5 grafted replications of the 40 on-farm selections and over 60 new entries from a collaborator, James Nave and Greg Miller, were also included in the trial. Commercial checks for long-term evaluation were included, which include the listed cultivars, but then many more. And the trial also serves to confirm this, conserve the selections long-term, where eventual orchard thinning will not reduce the unique genotypes. So this will basically transition to a repository. Some of the selections will feed into the breeding pipeline as next generation parents, but in the interim, we've deployed hand pollinated full siblings from our repository based on complementary hybridization, as well as select half sibling families in balanced quantities so that we can have some assurance that we're systematically using our founder parentage before we move on to using some of these selections. So after the first year of progeny deployment, with the types of materials I just mentioned, we have 9 breeding members, which means the grower has planted 250 seedlings or more, typically of 5 families with at least 50 seedlings each. And then we have a few larger plantings in the northern Kentucky area, as you can see by the circle size, including a really exceptional planting of full siblings that represents a partial diallele design using around 20 founder parents from our repository that we plan to use for marker trait association work going forward. So I'll wrap it up with this slide. As we incorporate new on-farm selections and deploy new breeding generations across diverse environments, germplasm tracking and data collection will be powered with the management software eBrita, which is a Dutch software that Greg helped pick out. The software provides invaluable tracking from nursery to field establishment so that we can maintain seedling identity with QR codes associated with unique pedigree ID identifiers. So each seedling has its own pedigree identifier. This function is also applicable to in situ and ex situ conservation as well, I'll point out. And then when the trees come of age, so you can see how we're labeling seedlings in the nursery before deployment. But when the seeds come of age for phenotyping, we can refresh labels with more permanent labels, like you see on the cattle tag, to ease data collection and archiving across remote locations. So university researchers can create and upload data collection sheets like within eBrita, like you see in the upper left-hand corner of the slide here, to make them available remotely or accessible anywhere using the web or web browser or field application. And then data can be directly entered either by a grower or remote field technicians into the field app, which automatically uploads or syncs the data to a cloud-based storage when returning to Wi-Fi. So I'll just say a quick thank you and note that we have a new website at the bottom of this slide before handing it over to Greg. Greg, I think you're up.
Oh, I'm on. Okay, glad to be here. Let me see if I can bring up my slides. First of all, remind everyone, I'm a chestnut grower from Eastern Ohio. I make my living growing chestnuts and selling chestnut trees. And I would also like to acknowledge that 1979, Wes Jackson gave a lecture at Iowa State University, where I was in school at the time. And after his lecture, I decided to do what I've been doing for the last 40 years. So thanks to Wes Jackson and the Land Institute for kind of nudging me into what I'm doing. So, first of all, to put 40 years work into 10 minutes is a challenge. We'll see how well we do. The current situation is that unlike most other perennial crops, commercial chestnut orchards in the eastern USA mostly rely on seedlings, as Ron Revord said. It happens that a large portion of offspring from good parents, and that's a good qualifier, they perform as well as grafted trees or better.
Greg, if you are trying to share your screen, we're not seeing it.
Oh, sorry. I thought I did that, but apparently not. So, well, I won't repeat what I just said, but we in the commercial industry, at least in the eastern USA, are relying mostly on seedling orchards. And therefore, with many thousands of seedlings in production and many more thousands being planted every year, it's an obvious opportunity to use these production orchards, you know, and a dual purpose for also genetic evaluation and breeding. Growers want to plant the best trees, so they have a vested interest in doing evaluation and selection on their own. In other words, the selfish needs of and interests and practices of the growers over decades have resulted in kind of a de facto breeding program, even though we never let growers share their information and genetic materials, the more access they have collectively to larger populations and a broader range of genetic materials. In other words, the more we share, the faster and more genetic gain we as individual farmers can achieve. So maybe the good news and the bad news about this situation is there is an overwhelmingly broad genetic base in Castaigne, includes at least 7 species, and there's a lot of variation within each species. 3 of those species have been grown commercially for hundreds of years, if not more. At this stage in the evaluation and selection, we are really poised for substantial and rapid genetic gains per generation. I think we can double yields, for example, in one generation, which would make the grain breeders envious. One of my pet peeves is growers need to get over the notion, you know, they always want me to send me your best. There's no such thing as the best. There's a large genetic pool of what is good enough for commercial use. And within that large pool, we can fine tune for specific traits, plus continue further improvements. And I think it's important to remember that production improvement is a combination of genetic improvement and cultural practices. You know, everything we do, planting, spacing, pruning, fertilizer, pest control, harvesting, all the cultural practices have to be developed in tight connection with the genetic improvement. We can't have one without the other. So now sort of developing the network kind of from this point forward, growers have a keen insight into the characteristics that are important, mostly because their customers are telling them what's important. One of the maybe difficulties or challenges is that what's important changes over time. So kind of our selection criteria is somewhat of a moving target. And also different growers have different ideas and practices. This leads to plurality of pursuit. So we as growers, we don't have to convince Ron Revord what he ought to be selecting for. We can all do whatever crazy idea we want to do. And I think over time, this means that, you know, the way to have a good idea is to have a lot of ideas. We don't have to argue about which is the best. We can pursue multiple ideas at the same time. So as Ron already said, the selection criteria that we all are engaged in selecting for, and these are sort of in order of priority and order. I think the most important thing is nut quality, which includes a lot of different attributes: flavor, peelability, storability, size and shape of the nuts. And these are all dependent on the end use, which, as I just mentioned, might change over time, or certainly there are more than one end use. And of course, the trees have to have disease and pest resistance. It turns out that in chestnut, we have no chemical controls for all the diseases. The only control we have, and it's very effective, is genetic control. So breeding and selection are important. Also for pest resistance, I think we have the option and the genetic resources to select for resistance to insects. And another important attribute is the growth form and kind of orchard management characteristics. It might, you know, not only the shape of the tree and how well that contributes to yield, but also things like mechanical harvesting might require growth characteristics and ripening characteristics that the consumer doesn't see, but the grower sees. And I have fourth is yield. It's kind of like after you got all those other characteristics lined up, then yield becomes what we select for. And of course, yield is a very complex trait, not just one thing. It has a lot of components. So it's, even though it's important, it's a complicated criterion. So now I'm going to just mention a few things that have changed over time. And in other words, kind of what I used to think was important is now different. Over the last several years, we have seen increased demand for smaller chestnuts. We used to sell out of the large chestnuts and then try to sell the small ones. Now we sell out of the kind of small to medium-sized chestnuts first. Even when we price medium chestnuts the same as large, we sell more medium than large, which makes me wish I hadn't thrown away some of the trees just because they had nuts that were too small. The other thing that has emerged, blossom end rot, also known as what Ron has correctly called chestnut anthracnose. This is a problem that has just really become prominent in the last 10 or 12 years. I'm not sure why. It was not a big problem before that, but one of the members of our co-op, Bob Staley, had a tree that was just like the perfect tree in terms of yield, nut quality. Turned out it was very susceptible to blossom end rot. And so here's a case where a really good tree all of a sudden becomes a tree to get rid of. And this is why we have to maintain this large diversity so that we always have trees we can eliminate and still have a lot left. Sort of the newest thing is I'm beginning to, you know, if I want to plant a tree, I first got to cut one down. And we discovered that when you have a 40-year-old orchard, it's an expensive proposition to get rid of all those trees to plant the next. And so not only my idea, but a lot of my colleagues have said, well, why not grow a timber tree that you also harvest nuts from? And then when the orchard reaches the end of its life, you can invite the loggers to come in, and they will cut down the trees, pay you money, and that will probably at least cover the cost of all the tree removal and establishing a new orchard. And I used to think that it was a trade-off between wood production and nut production, but now as I see the actual trees, instead of just pay attention to my preconceptions, some of these large timber type trees actually out yield the shorter, more rounded, typical Chinese chestnuts. So I don't think there is a trade-off between wood production and nut production. We can do both. And this is something new, which means we got to select a different set of trees. And the other part is it takes a long time for a tree to, like this one, A5, to exhibit its growth form and its nut production. Also, there seems to be a lot of interest in the peeled chestnut products, chestnut flour, peeled kernels, and chestnut for fermented beverages like beer spirits. So we are now, for the first time, looking at selecting trees just for these peeled and processed products instead of just the fresh market. So with this huge task of picking out trees and growing trees over a large number of growers who reside in diverse environments, there is a critical need for a central organization, you know, as Ron has set up, the Chestnut Improvement Network, and especially the database, which we can contribute our data and extract data from, because even now, and certainly in the future, there's way more information than any one person could comprehend. So we need the help of the central organization and some computers to help us take advantage of all the work that we're doing. And it will require and be worth all the time and money that this takes. In other words, we'll have to pay something, but we'll get more in return. And that's it.
Perfect. Thank you both for your presentations. There are plenty of questions rolling in. A quick reminder, and I see Kelsey has posted this in the chat too, to put your questions in the Q&A specific space so we don't lose track of them in the chat. But I do want to be sure to come to some of these that have been posted in the chat. First, about the sort of trade-offs of making these selections. When you are selecting for disease resistance, are you, say, losing out on flavor quality and vice versa? What does that process look like? And a note here for folks who are posting about American chestnut, we are talking about Chinese chestnut. So we might spend a little bit of time, just a brief mention on the differences.
Ron, you want me to take that one? Or?
Sure, and I could tag on wherever you leave off.
Yeah, I think because we have a huge diversity, it is possible, and in fact, we are obligated to select for multiple traits at the same time. So yeah, there's always some trade-off whenever you select for one thing that eliminates what else you can carry along, but we have enough that we can select for many, many traits at the same time.
Yeah, I would say we do find some of these resistances and storability in backgrounds that have nice flavor. So they're not necessarily traits at odds with each other or uncorrelated. And the diversity Greg's mentioning is helpful.
There's also, can we spend just a minute to describing the differences between American chestnut and Chinese chestnut?
Yeah, I think first of all, American chestnut is contributing some of its genes and hybrids that we have. So there are Chinese American hybrids and European American hybrids that have ended up with some of their genes in some really good cultivars. So we don't have American chestnuts per se, but that we are picking up some American traits. And I think in particular, we're interested in kind of the nut flavors and qualities and the timber growth form. But we also have plenty of good flavor in Chinese and European, and timber growth form in European and Japanese. So So yeah, we use American, but we don't, it's not something we're pursuing by itself.
Yeah, and I guess I would just tack onto that, that although we'd like, Greg and I have had discussions on this, like local versus general adaptations, because we have such a wide geography, generalized adaptations have a bigger bang for their buck, transferability of a cultivar to different environments. But I do think that some of the work from the TACF in doing like really deep sequencing and genotype or genome-wide association by environment analyses will probably contribute to finding like genetic variation that could be used for breeding for different areas throughout the eastern US. They have like really extensive populations that they've developed since the 80s, so they could do those kind of sophisticated analyses, whereas we might be a few generations away from that. But
And TACF, for those unfamiliar.
the American Chestnut Foundation.
Thanks. Yeah, that's great. And I welcome the conversation still on those differences too, and how they can be connected. A couple of questions have popped up about planting multiple nut trees or other tree species together in the same space. If that's something that is included in this research, in this participatory research, or if that's something that you recommend.
So the big problem in mixing crops with chestnuts is that for any harvesting system, whether it's by hand or by machine, and eventually we got to get to a machine better than it is now, you need a clean orchard floor. So wherever the nuts drop needs to be clean so you can pick up the chestnuts from it. So that sort of precludes having other perennial crops in the understory. I mean, they might grow there fine, but it interferes with harvesting, which is a big problem. I have been to China a couple times. They grow crops under their chestnut trees, but they are all annual crops, which are harvested and out of the orchard before the chestnuts ripen. So in one sense, yeah, we can multi-crop, but I think combining them with perennial crops, at least while the chestnuts are in full production, I don't think will work. But on the other hand, if we kind of put things on a timeline, during the first 5 to 7 years while chestnuts are being established, I think it makes a lot of sense to maybe grow some berry crops like brambles in the space until the chestnut trees get big. And then as the brambles would normally be not good for the site, then the chestnuts can take over. So I think a timed succession with other crops makes sense more than putting a crop under the chestnut trees.
Yeah, I would echo what Greg said. It's not an immediate part of our work. We try to focus on providing some structured breeding across a lot of different locations, and that's enough to keep us occupied. But I think that what we've observed, or my colleagues have observed in hazelnut, is that a lot of that innovation ends up taking place on the grower side. Intercropping, alley cropping, based on respective growers' expertise, especially in the non-bearing years. I think there could be some innovative work done.
So if you're one of those people, feel free to post in the chat or on the discussion board. It will be time for us to move on. I just want to note there are more questions in the Q&A, so you two are welcome to pop in there. And, we've been talking a lot about Kernza, thinking about intercropping this morning. That is one that seems like it could be relevant with chestnut. But we need to move on. Thank you, Ron and Greg. Stick around if we have time at the end of the session for more chestnut questions. Otherwise, there's some rich discussion happening now in the chat as well. All right, we are going to switch now to elderberry. Okay, just a quick introduction for these two. Liz Prenger is a senior research specialist at the Center for Agroforestry who joined the team just last year. She is a convert from soybeans and is now applying her background in genetics and genomics to develop resources for a better understanding of what's possible with elderberry. And Terry Durham has been a bedrock of American elderberry production in the Midwest. I think we can safely say that Terry, as a champion elderberry farmer, is one big reason why Missouri is the #1 producer of American elderberry. He's really been at this, well, for decades now, and as an educator and innovator and owner of River Hills Harvest, he's really propelled this native perennial specialty crop into our hearts and our fields. So with that, Liz, would you like to start us off?
All right, so thanks, Hannah, for the introduction. And as she mentioned, I am fairly new to elderberry. I started within the last year, but so this project or this presentation is going to mostly focus on a little brief introduction on what's been done, and then I'll move into our goals for elderberry breeding projects. American elderberry, or Sambucus canadensis, is native to Eastern and Central North America, and it has been used extensively by indigenous people, and often in a medicinal capacity. And as of 2017, there were nearly 500 producing acres and almost 800 planted in the United States. And over 40% of this acreage is in Missouri. And then there's a few pictures there of current uses of elderberry. So American elderberry is a medium to large bush or small tree. It puts out a lot of suckers, prefers moist, well-drained sites with plenty of sun, and is hardy to zones 4 through 10. And then in the Midwest, it produces clusters of flowers in June that mature to dark purple berries in late summer, so around August. What we know so far about genetics and reproduction, there is some amount of self-incompatibility in elderberries. So a given cultivar can't pollinate itself necessarily. So it's outcrossing, and this is why it's often recommended to plant multiple cultivars together in an orchard. It is likely a diploid, so 2 sets of chromosomes with 36 total chromosomes. And on this side of the slide here, there's a diagram showing genome sizes. So a 2012 estimate of American elderberry put the genome size at about 14 billion base pairs. And then our work, we sent some tissue to Oregon State, and they estimated about just over 12 billion base pairs for our tissue. European elderberry, just over 13 billion. And then for comparison, the human genome is just over 3 billion. So the American elderberry and European elderberry, very large, complex genomes. So more recent organized breeding and selection efforts have mostly been in New York, starting in the 1920s and 30s, with the release of Adams 1 and 2, Ezioff, and York. And then there have been several others from the Nova Scotia Experiment Station in the 50s and 60s. And then more recently, there have been a lot of selections from the wild around the Midwest that were trialed and released through the efforts of people like Andy Thomas, Pat Byers, Terry, and other collaborators. So our group's breeding and research goals, we plan to try to build on current progress to develop improved cultivars. We will perform targeted pollinations to further our understanding of cross-compatibility, and that plays into that self-incompatibility, and develop populations. And then we'd like to do a more in-depth characterization of flowering for popular cultivars and perform a reference genome assembly. So each of those things that I mentioned supports our breeding efforts. So phenology, or flower development, helps us to understand the compatibility of timing between different cultivars. Cross-compatibility helps us understand self-incompatibility and which genotypes or cultivars can be crossed together successfully. The reference genome will lead to more genomic resources that we can use to help us develop improved cultivars. And then, of course, the interdisciplinary collaboration and grower input will inform our future goals and strategies. So in general, a plant breeding pipeline looks something like this, and it starts with selection of parents for traits of interest, and moves to crossing those parents and developing populations, and looking at the offspring, and then selecting the offspring that have those desirable traits. Once you've done that, you can move into replicated trials, regionally, locally, and then across years. And then once you're confident you have a good amount of data to support that this is a robust cultivar, you can release it and hand it over to growers. So right now we're in the really early stages with the American elderberry in our program. So we're still crossing, developing populations, looking at offspring, and developing resources to support our breeding. So in 2022, we planted over 2,000 open pollinated offspring. So open pollinated, we know the female parent, and for each individual seedling, that would be either Bob Gordon, Wildwood, Pocahontas, Ozark, Kelly 714, or Rogersville. And we don't know the male parent for each seedling, but it is most likely one of those in that list. And then we have additional open pollinated seeds germinating for this coming year. So as these seedlings grow, we can evaluate them for traits of interest, and that includes things like vigor, uniformity, yield, and resistance to shattering, and then several others, and it may develop as we go along as well. Here are just a few pictures from our planting this past year. Several of them are from the spring back in May, and then one was from this fall in October. So as I mentioned, we want to build on what's already been done in characterizing flower development, and look at things like when buds break and pollen shed, and then blooming and ripening, but then also maybe peak bloom and peak ripening for some popular Midwestern cultivars. And then the targeted pollinations that we'd like to do that will help us understand cross-compatibility and develop new populations, we will do mostly using potted plants that you can see in that background picture. And this is so that we can bring them into the greenhouse or isolate them as needed. And then the last project there is the assembly of a reference genome. Bob Gordon was selected. And right now we are working with the MU Bioinformatics Core to, they're working on assembly right now and quality assessment that'll help us determine next steps. So with that, thanks. And thanks to the Reward Lab and the crew out at the Horticulture and Agroforestry Farm for help with maintaining plots. Andy and the Southwest Center crew, and then the MU Bioinformatics Core and Dr. Contreras at OSU.
Thank you, Liz. Terry, whenever you're ready to switch over, we are ready for you.
So I'm Terry Durham. I've been farming. This is my 40th decade to be an organic farmer, and we grew vegetables for a long time. And we were always interested in elderberries, and around the end of the 90s, we decided to start changing over from annuals to grow perennials. And it was, I think, 1998 that Andy and Patrick got interested in the elderberry and got a little bit of grant money to start the elderberry improvement program. And I had been interested in elderberries from my younger years of picking them for my grandma and helping her make jelly. And my dad taught us how to make pop guns and whistles and stuff out of the pieces of elderberry. So I'd always loved the elderberry, but it had never really been developed as a commercial crop here in the United States. So we work with the Sambucus canadensis, which is the dark purple elderberry that's native from the Continental Divide towards the east. So there's a large population of them. I have found elderberries growing in every state almost that I've gone to. I know every state west or east of the Continental Divide has elderberries, from the southern tip of Florida to all the way up into Canada, it's great, so adaptable. It has that huge genome, so there's many different kinds of elderberries that grow in different areas. So we're beginning to learn that, and now we have been able to successfully get the canadensis to grow in every state, including Hawaii and Alaska are also able to grow the canadensis. And we're still learning a little bit about the adaptation of the varieties that are the selections out there and how they grow. And so when we first started planting the elderberries, we were just collecting some from the wild at random that looked good. We didn't really have anything to work with. It was probably about 2002 that Patrick and Andy first started having some resources for us of stuff that was coming out of the trials that were good native ones. We started planting the Wildwood, Bob Gordon, and Ranch at the very beginning, all three together. We always encouraged people to plant a selection because we really didn't know what was going to grow best anywhere. And we started with those three selections, and they did really well for us. We liked it. About 2005, we were able to start having enough berries to begin to make some kind of products. Elderberry is a processing crop. Not very much is used as a fresh fruit, but we know we can do that more. Some of the research is all on elderberry in the past was all from the European type elderberry, and you weren't able to consume it raw like you can the American elderberries easily, so it never really been developed. So we have developed it as a processing crop mostly. So once we were able to get fruit, we had to figure out how to clean it, how to process it. So we had to work with engineers to develop machines that would take the elderberries on the stem and take the berries and get them, destem them so that we have nice clean fruit. So we did that. That really helped improve things. We started being able to bring in some more growers once we had some equipment figured out, and we kind of had an idea of what to start to make with it. We started out just making the juice, and we had came across that idea because the European elderberries had supplied the United States with all of its elderberries for a long time. Pretty much all the processed stuff that came that we were using was from the European elderberries, and we'd seen that they were bringing in concentrate, and it was bringing in quite a bit of money. So we thought that we could compete with that with our American elderberry. We were, Patrick and Andy were selecting for a few different things, or looking for some different things in the elderberries that were very helpful for us. The first one that they were introducing was the Wildwood. We had been growing 2 varieties of Wildwood. The Wildwood 2 is the one that has been released as Wildwood. It's a great plant. It had the tendency to make 3 flowers after it set its primocane head of flowers. It would continue to grow and bloom and make 3 additional heads of flowers, and sometimes it would do that again. So it was a long term, and so slowly as growers we figured out it was like most things. There were indeterminate types and there were determinate types. Some that were going to grow and make flowers and set fruit, grow some more, and do that a few different times. So it would be a long harvest. But some of the other ones, like the next one they introduced, which was the Bob Gordon, was the next one they released. It had the tendency to make its fruit all at one time. And there were advantages to us for that because we could go in there, we could harvest it quicker. We weren't having to go through the field as many times to collect the fruit. We liked that Bob Gordon for that reason. And then the third one that we were working was with the Ranch, which is also a determinate type of elderberry, but it was the earliest. So some of the all the different selections have advantages, a few characteristics that we would like to carry through to this new breeding program that Liz is going to be working on. And so with the Wildwood, it's a great indeterminate type. And if you're growing flowers, and a lot of flower producers are starting up in Europe, 50% of their crop is flowers. So we knew that we could work in that could be a great new thing we could sell if we could get enough of them. And then with the Bob Gordon, as well as being determinate, it had very sweet fruit. It had a high Brix, so it was really good for making wine. We learned to do that. And it also would turn its fruit upside down and hang it when it got ripe, so that it was harder for the birds to get on there to eat that fruit. So those are the three main ones that we were working with. And then we also always like to keep in there the old standard Adams, which was released in about 1928 from New York. But most of the ones that we're working with now are more of from the central part of the country here, from the Midwest, from Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kansas. That area is where most of the genetics were coming from for these original ones. And so we have had some more brought on. The next one they brought out, I think, was Marge, which was seedling found that was a European type, but it would grow here, which was unusual because most of the European elderberries, the Niagara that we had tried to grow here in the Midwest, didn't persist very long. After a few years, they always seemed to get diseased and would die, something in our soil or something that was causing them to fail. So the Marge was the first one of the European type that would grow here, and they released that early on also. The other thing that we were looking at in the beginning was the how to prune it properly. The European type, the Niagara, only blooms and fruits on 2-year-old wood and older, whereas the American elderberry that we are working with, it will bloom on 1-year-old wood. So we had that advantage of being able to prune those plants to the ground every year. And some of the early research they were working with was showing us that the heads of the fruit would be twice as big on our primocanes. So we have developed a system of trying to grow mostly primocanes have the bigger heads, so that we get a bigger harvest and fewer times over the field. Because when you cut them off, it synchronizes the growth so that it blooms at the same time, and then it gets its fruit at the same time, so that we can get in there and in 1 week with 2 harvests, get all of the fruit off. I've also introduced, they had Ozark. Ozark has been really hard for our growers. We don't have hardly any orchards planted with that right now that we know of. There are a few, but it doesn't seem to be as healthy as we'd like. It does have lots of antioxidant, which is one of the things that we're looking for in elderberries. We want that high medicinal values that they can have. It was really strong in that, but it was a little weak for starting. And since we teach our farmers to start a little nursery of your own with the different varieties, see which ones are going to grow best in your climate and soil, and then you could propagate from that nursery to grow more plants. And so that's kind of the way that we've been working. We have been doing yearly conferences to train farmers. We have developed the equipment to do the processing. We continue to create new products from the elderberry, and it's growing fast. I think that they are underestimating how many acres are planted out there, because we work with growers and we know that there's a lot coming on out there. So it's a growing industry. We've been able to do it mostly with the research that's been happening mostly in Missouri, but now it's expanding out to being more of a regional thing, and we're doing the trials north to south, so we'll be able to have a better idea of what to plant where.
Perfect.
So,
Thank you so much. There's so much we can talk about on these subjects, and we are running short on time, so I want to make sure we have a few minutes for questions for you two. And I think this actually transitions really well with some of what you're saying, Terry, and gosh, what you two shared together, I think just brings it all together with, you know, the process of scaling and genetic improvement and what this means for farmers on the ground and processing and all of the pieces fitting together. So a couple of people have been asking about sourcing cultivars. River Hills Harvest, Terry Durham is selling some of those cuttings. Where else can people find this? Is there a shortage? How can folks get involved?
well, there are a lot of growers. I mean, if you were starting an orchard and you're an entrepreneur and you have to cut your trees down every year anyway when you prune them. So you have cuttings, and there's a lot of growers around that have cuttings. If you look online, we have cuttings. That's what we're doing right now. We're really busy with pruning the orchards and propagating the elderberries. There are a few good sources around, and you can get organic and conventional types. Both of those are available now. For a while, we were having more problem with finding enough organic cuttings. So there's a lot of variety out there. Be a little bit careful. We prefer people to buy from a licensed nursery so that we're trying to make sure that we're not getting any diseases in there. It's so easy to just pass the elderberry along from a cutting. You can also pass diseases. And so we've seen a little bit of virus pass this way, so we're a little concerned with that.
Thanks. That's a really important point.
Okay.
Another question that has come up a couple of times is about intercropping. So just like with chestnuts for elderberry, are there any recommendations you can make, or people who are intercropping?
Absolutely. I mean, farmers, they get out there and try to figure out all the different ways to make things work. And so you don't have too many years to wait. You're not waiting on a chestnut tree or a walnut with elderberry. You know, if you grow it good the first year, the second year, you begin to get a considerable harvest. So most of the interplanting has been done a couple different ways. What we encourage people to do in the beginning was to just every 10th row, instead of planting the elderberries, to plant a habitat row. And those could consist of a nut tree every 25 feet with maybe plums next to it and then hazelnuts in between it. We weren't thinking about harvesting the food that, you know, the habitat rows weren't for making profit. They're for us to utilize as the farmers, and maybe they would do enough of them where we could do that. But eventually we would have every 100 feet through our orchard, we would have mature walnuts or pecans or chestnuts, depending on the sites. Now we've seen more of, I know a couple chestnut growers that are planting 2 rows of elderberries between their established rows of chestnuts. So we think, 12 or 15 years will be a good lifetime for an elderberry orchard. You don't know that we really don't have any older than that, so we don't know what happens. We have pecan growers that are also growing elderberries between their new plantings of pecans, and that's usually rows that are between the rows of nut trees. So we've seen those. We know people that have started it with growing some grain in between. Some people are taking hay in between, but you'll have to spread it out further for those things. We started a 12-foot between rows, which is harder to get equipment to make hay or do things. So some of the farmers have gone to 14 or even 17 feet so that they can harvest a cover crop or a hay crop in between or something like that. Some people are trying to work with asparagus. We're going to try to do interplanting of asparagus this year on the end rows in a few places to see if we can get that to be a crop that we can grow with elderberries also.
Nice. So many possibilities. And we are right about at time. I am seeing a few questions really for each of the sets of presenters in this session in the Q&A. So before you hop off, if you have a minute to check those out and address some of those questions, that would be wonderful. Otherwise, we'll do our best here from the Center for Agroforestry. At this point, we are going to take a 30-minute break, and then we'll come back in for our second set of sessions here. But I just want to say thank you again to all of our presenters this morning: Terry Durham, Liz Prenger, Greg Miller, Ron Revord, Ben Penner, Tessa Peters in this session, and earlier Allison Miller and Nick Jordan. Thank you all so much. And for everyone who is here participating in the discussion, we will post that Padlet discussion board link one more time in the chat to make sure that you are posting links and resources and your own experiences with these crops there. That space will be archived with these recordings. So with that, please get some fresh air, eat some lunch, do what you need to do, and we'll hope to see you back here for the next set of sessions.